Welcome back to my channel Programming with a Purpose. This is the lesson 15 in the beginner series of learning iOS development using Swift. This is going to be the last lecture in this series. We are going to explore about the automatic referencing counter or ARC. So what is ARC? ARC is basically a mechanism to track and manage app memory. So when we are going to create instances for a class, we need to assign memory to it and free up the memory which is no longer required at a certain point in time. This is all done by ARC. So ARC tracks how many properties, constants and variables are referring to each class instance, and if there is any strong reference to each of the class instance, it is not deactivated or the space is not freed up. So when we do this, we assign instance to a property, constant or variable in terms of a strong reference. So you can see a few examples here that when we write these lines, we are going to create implicitly strong references, like we have created an instance of a recipe or a constant from a recipe, or a property is referring to an instance of a class. So here I am going to create a class and show you how strong referencing in ARC works. I have created a class with the name person, and it has a property with the name which is of type string and an init method that is initializing self.name to the name and then printing it. And then there is a dinit method I've written which is just printing a statement. Remember that the dinit method is there to perform any additional steps before the deinitialization takes place, which is automatically done by the ARC. We are creating three references reference 1, 2 and 3, which is of optional type of class person. So here you can see that both of these three references are nil on the right hand side of the screen. When I am going to initialize reference 1 to an instance of a person with the name John Appleseed, you are going to see this line, John Appleseed is being initialized since init method is called on person. Now after that I am going to basically pass this reference 1 to 2 and 3, and now all of these three references have the type of an instance of a person, as you can see on the right hand side. Now I am moving reference 1 and reference 2 to a nil value, and you can see here that both of these turn nil, but the deinitializer is not called since we have a strong reference which is reference 3. Once it's set to nil, you can see that the deinitializer is being called. So it means that as long as even one strong reference exists, the deinitializer or the actual freeing up of memory will not be performed by ARC. So now I am going to basically copy the class person because I want to edit it, comment out the previous code, and then create a class apartment with certain properties which you can see here. So we have a property with the name unit and a tenant. So tenant is of type person, and class person will also have a property of type apartment. Since a person is going to live in an apartment, and an apartment can have a tenant, but an apartment can exist without a tenant, so we are going to mark it as optional. So here we are creating two of the instance types of person and apartment, and then we are going to initialize John to a person with the name John Appleseed and an apartment with a unit with the name of whatever you want to give, suppose 4A. So after that you can see that I am going to get John.apartment. Here I haven't mentioned the property apartment, so I am adding it in the class person here, and it is also of the type optional because a person cannot be assigned an apartment at a certain point in time. So here I am passing it the apartment, and the tenant is being assigned as John. This is known as strong reference cycle. So we have two of the variables John and unit 4a, which are strong references to their individual classes, and both of these classes have a strong relationship with each other. So it means that if we are going to deinitialize one of the class, the deinitializer will not be called because there is a strong reference to it in the other class instance. So this is going to create a problem and the memory will leak. So you can see here, while setting John as nil, the deinitializer is not called. Now when I set unit 4a is equals to nil, no deinitializer is called. So this is a problem with the memory, so we need to address it. So here you can see that in the picture we have removed the strong references to each of the classes, but still the classes have a strong reference to each other, so ARC is not going to deinitialize the space. So here I am going to resolve the strong reference cycle by using the weak keyword for the tenant, because a tenant has a shorter lifespan as compared to apartment. In that case we are going to use weak, and if property has a longer or an equal lifetime as compared to the class it belongs to, then unowned keyword will be used. So here I'm showing you example of a weak keyword. So I'm going to make the tenant inside the class apartment weak, and it is going to be a variable whenever weak is used, and it is going to be an optional. So these are the mandatory requirement for using a weak keyword inside a class for a property. So you can see here when we are going to use weak. Next I'm going to show you the example of unowned. So you can see here I am commenting out unit 4 is equals to nil, and now John Appleseed is being deinitialized. When I am going to mark this as uncommented, you can see that now apartment 4A is being deinitialized. So it means that just marking the tenant property as weak is going to deinitialize both of the classes instance whenever it's required. Now we are going to move to another example of unowned, but before that I am going to show you in the picture form how the process of setting these nil will work. So we have strong references to person instance and apartment instance with the variable John and unit 4A, and they have a strong and a weak relationship. And you can see here whenever I have deinitialized John, one is basically deinitialized, and when I have deinitialized in 4A, the next instance is deinitialized. So all of the deinitialization and freeing up of memory is working perfectly. Next, I have copy pasted an example of a customer and a credit card from the link mentioned in the description box. You can copy this code from there. So we have a class customer that has a property name and a card. So a customer can have a card or do not have a card, but when we are creating the class with a credit card, we are going to mark the customer as unowned, because a customer is going to outlive a credit card in case a credit card expires or is deleted. So we are going to mark this relationship with the keyword unowned, and it can have a constant value. It does not need to be a variable just like a weak keyword. And the customer is not going to be an optional because it is going to outlive the credit card, so it needs to have a value when we are going to deinitialize it in this case. So here you can see here that I have created an init method and a deinit method for both of these classes. All of the relevant requirements are there. Next we are going to create the instance of a customer and credit card, and we are going to set it as nil, and you are going to see that what happens when the deinit method of the customer is called. So we'll move forward with the example. So next I am creating a variable John of type customer and making it as optional so that we will be able to set it as nil later on. I am calling the initializer with the name John Appleseed, and the instance is created. So there is a little bit of error. Comment out the previous code so that the name does not clash. So here I have created successfully the customer type in John instance. After that I am going to set John.card is equals to a credit card with a certain number and a customer of itself. So you can see here that John is passed and a number is being entered for the credit card. So afterwards I am going to show you how we can set John as nil and what is going to happen. So when I've set it as nil, you can see here both the card and John Appleseed are being deinitialized. So this is what unowned is going to do. It is going to basically mark the unowned credit card also to nil. So this is how the relationship is there. We have a strong reference to the class, and they have a strong reference and an unowned reference to each other. So we are going to discuss next the unowned optional referencing. So previously we have created the unknown referencing which are not optional, but in a certain condition you can mark it as an optional. So I am going to copy and paste an example here. You can look into it. We have a class department that has name and courses, and we have a class course, and it has two unowned variables. One is a department that is not an optional, and the next course that is an optional. So if there are any courses that are related to a department that are deleted, suppose we delete a department, all of the courses along with the department should be deleted. But we have a next course that is not going to be set to nil explicitly. We need to set it as nil because it is going to basically outlive our class course. So we need to set it as nil. Check each and every reference that the next course pointing to that course is nil or not. So this is the problem with using an optional. If you want to use it, you need to be quite careful. So here you can see here that I have set 3 of the courses, intro, intermediate and advanced, and after that I'm setting each of this as a prerequisite to the other. And when I've set department as nil, you can still see that the courses are existing. This is due to their linkage with the next course, which is an optional type. So you need to handle the unowned optional types on your own to see that if they are being set as nil or not. So here the department is deinitialized, which is of the name horticulture, but the courses are still there. So I'm going to print name of the course and you are going to see that they are set as nil because they have a next course which is an unowned optional reference. So this is how their relationship will look like. They have a strong reference to the courses, but the courses have unknown reference to the department. So you need to handle it explicitly. So the next we are going to discuss the case of unknown reference and implicitly unwrapped optional property. So you can see here we have a variable or capital city which is an unwrapped optional property, and we can directly use its value without unwrapping. This is the class country. We have created another class city and it has an unowned constant of name country which is of type country, and you can see here in the initializer of the class country we have passed the name, and then self becomes available. We are going to pass it to the self.capital city, and this helps us to initialize the class country and city with just one liner, and we can simply access the value of the class city instance using the capital city. So you can see here the initialization of this class. This is in the case where a country and a city cannot be nil once they are initialized. In the case of person and apartment, both of those values can be nil. And in case of customer and credit card, you can see here that the credit card can be nil. So we have used unowned. But in this case where both of these values cannot be nil, once initialized, we are going to use implicitly unwrapped value of capital city, and an other value can be, other property can be used as an unowned. So this is how we are going to do this kind of a scenario. Next, we are moving to another topic of strong reference cycles for closure. So you have previously seen that there are two classes referencing to each other are going to create a strong reference cycle. In the same manner, if we have a computed property or another lazy property, just like as we have here as HTML is also going to use self. So it means that it is referencing to itself and it is going to create a strong reference with itself, and when we are going to deinitialize it, it is not going to be deinitialized because a closure is using it as a strong reference. So you can see here when heading is deinitialized, it is being deinitialized. So for that purpose, to achieve this, we need to add a capture list. So a capture list is the use of the keyword unowned or weak before the parameters in a closure, and if there are no parameters, we can simply add the capture list. Just like here I've added unowned self and weak delegate, and here you can mention in the next type example you can see here there is unknown self and weak delegate. So the unowned and the weak keyword depends upon the relationship of that closure with the class. So here I'm adding that capture list, and after that I'm setting heading to nil, and it is going to basically deinitialize the heading. After that I'm going to show you another example of a paragraph with the HTML element, and as you can see here that after that it is going to be set to nil and the init is going to be called. I'm setting some of the spaces to nil. So here you can see here that the h1 is deallocated, and after that a paragraph is created and paragraph is deinitialized. So after adding the relevant capture list, it is going to be a weak relationship or an unowned relationship with the closure, and the closure is allowing the instance of the class to be set to nil or deinitialized. So So this is all for the ARC. I'm going to show you the example here. So we have a strong reference with the HTML element, and here we have set it as unowned relationship from the closure to the class. So this is the completion of this series at this point. I hope you've learned a lot from it. If you are not familiar with certain concepts, just like initializer, deinitializer, you can go back and look at the lecture of this series that addresses the initializer and deinitializer. So this is all for this series. If you like this series, subscribe to my channel, share it with your friends, and stay tuned for other interesting content on the channel. Thanks for watching.